Something that I think is increasingly more common. Can a Christian believe that truth is relative?
Can they?
Yeah.
Yeah, they can. Should they?
Is it compatible? Rather.
No, in the sense that a Christian operates from a core set of beliefs about what is truth. And the easy or simplistic explanation is there's God's truth. And the Christian is really the one who conforms their life in submission to that truth. The challenge of it is that we live in a society and a culture where truth is relative. And so you get the pushback of who says God's truth is truth, and a number of attacks.
Subjective too.
Yeah.
That's not my truth.
Against God's truth. Yeah, it's not my truth. So again, it comes back to the Christian determining it's a stance of faith. It's coming back to determining, regardless of how unpopular it is, regardless of all of the attacks against it, regardless of what it, how it leaves me with friends and acquaintances, I must trust that God's truth is right and best and live according to it. And even take the long-range perspective that there will come a day when God's truth will be seen for what it is and everybody else will then bow to it. I'm just choosing to do it sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a fixed absolute truth as defined by God, and it's just interesting these days to watch how that's under attack.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I can say it's under attack. It's certainly under attack, but it's been so thoroughly dismissed that it's a very small segment of society that still trust in it.
Yeah. Because most people don't like submitting those things that they, find hard to deal with about God's truth, or doesn't make them the most popular person in the world. In fact, it might put them in actual opposition of the rising culture, which I think is the main issue kind of going on.
Mm-hmm.
People are afraid, which, I'm not saying that that's not even... I think that some people have reason to be afraid, that it's not necessarily a ridiculous feeling, but I guess we're called to have the courage, right, to stand up against that, rather than just in fear sway with it. So I guess that this is one of them, but what makes Christianity different than the other religions? If people, kind of have this pluralistic approach of all roads lead to heaven. I mean, you hear a lot about that, especially now, even from Christians. What kind of makes it stand apart from the rest? And I'm not saying you have to go through each one, but is there something that you found to be distinctive?
For me, it's two or three things. I think there's the historical credibility of Christianity. Certainly, I think there's the character credibility of Christ, mm-hmm. as opposed to any other religious figurehead.
Yeah.
And then, again, this is up for debate, but I think the collection of scriptures as a consistent witness of that historical credibility and of that unique nature of Jesus separates it from other religions. Other religions have their writings, but they don't have in my opinion, they don't have the substantive writings to be able to confidently base their beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not prepared to go into the details, but I've actually seen a study or did a study of like Christ, the life of Christ compared to the historical references that we have to all the other, primary religious leaders, Muhammad and Buddha and all of them. And it's a, night and day sort of testimony to the very unique nature of Jesus, how he conducted himself, what's attributed to what he accomplished in his life, and the consistency with which he did it. So Jesus just head and shoulders above the other namesakes, which, again, not everybody buys that, but to me, that's one of the reasons why I think Christianity is more credible. Mm-hmm. Just because the person at the center of our faith is credible like no other. Then just the historical credibility in that there's this very consistent march through history where the work of God is consistent, and it's demonstrative. Like you can name the names and the places where these historic things happened. That this most other faiths they don't have that kind of historical legacy.
Something along those lines that I heard I thought was really interesting was whenever we think back of like, no one ever doubts our history on Rome, okay, or ancient Greece.
Yeah.
Most of what we know about, say, ancient Greece came from like one or two dudes that documented everything.
Yeah.
And the amount of information that we have to verify the scriptures is like tenfold what we have.
Yeah.
For most of those
the
others.
Numbers are staggering.
Yeah.
When it comes to the historical manuscripts by which we draw conclusions about historical figures. I mean, when you take what we know about Caesar, the number of documents that testify to his life and his accomplishment, it's small in number compared to the tens of thousands of documents that give credible witness to the work of Christ.
And when the documents were written, like the stuff written about Alexander the Great was like written, hundreds of years later, rather than at the time. I thought that was just really interesting. I was like, oh, wow. You never see anybody casting doubt on what we know about Alexander, but as soon as it comes to Jesus, we're like, well, yeah.
Yeah. And, I've always felt there's a certain unfortunate perception of the Gospels because they exist together in this thing called the Bible. They're often portrayed as, well, that's just some kind of conspiratorial meeting of the minds, and these four guys came up and shared some stories and wrote some things and basically deceived a group of people. But when you look at the honest record of who these individuals were and to what extent their paths crossed, and the eyewitnesses that they interviewed and the firsthand accounts that they were able to draw from a collection or recollection of the life of Jesus, it's just far and away superior. And I'm just the reason I'm kind of slow in responding here is that I have so many friends who have very different viewpoints on all of it. And I can just imagine them listening to this and laughing or dismissing what I'm saying.
Well, I'll give them a funny. There's this skit that I saw on YouTube, and it was like if Jesus didn't actually raise from the dead, and it was all the disciples, and they were sitting there, and I think Peter chimes up, and he goes, "Okay, guys, I got it. This is what we're gonna do. We're gonna go steal Jesus' body." And they're like, "Yeah, okay." We're gonna, and they're like, "Well, why?" Well, it's because we're gonna convince everybody that he didn't actually die, and that he actually rose from the grave, but he didn't. We just stole his body. And they're like, "Oh yeah." So and then he's like, "And then we're all going to get brutally murdered.
Yeah.
And then Nathan, the doubter, goes, wait, but are we going to get like rich and famous first? And he's like, no. We're going to get brutally murdered.
And they're like, I don't know if that sounds like such a great idea anymore.
Yes, and it's exactly how they were just all like cheering, and they were like,
Yeah,
what?
I've seen that. Yeah, now that you mentioned it. Again, the era in which we're living and the whole academic and scholarly bandwidth of information out there largely portrays Christianity as a joke and fabrication and conspiracy, and it's just not in my opinion, it's just not an honest treatment of the evidence.
We've seen where mere rational thought leads, or at least we're starting to, and it is
Not a good
a little
place.
bit crazier.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, that was
So if that was
all of
rapid
these.
fire, how long did that take?
138, which is about the same length of Satan, the Satan episode.
Yes, but we covered a variety of topics. What?
Yes.
5 different topics.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
6 different
Yeah.
topics. No,
Pretty
that's good. I enjoyed that. I like taking one topic and kind of exhausting it for an hour and a half, and I like that.
Yeah.
That one kind of puts me on my toes a little bit. Have to
Yeah,
be
it's
nimble.
more. I described whenever I texted it to you. I described it more of like you. Well, I think I was thinking is more like you're being on stage, kind of asking, getting asked the question, just because you can't just sit in like one place and
Yeah.
and it's supposed to be shorter. So
It is shorter in the sense that now you'll be able to break it up into, 5 or 6 different
yeah,
podcasts.
yeah, probably 5. Yeah, and for all our listeners that think our episodes are too long, here you go. You'll have at least 20, 22-minute long episodes.
We'll just track it, see which ones get the most views, and then we can take that back to the powers that be and say, see, the longer ones work. Or
We are the powers that be, Paul.
Oh, we are the
Yeah,
powers that be?
well, you are the power that be, but please don't give it to anybody else.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I enjoyed this conversation. And again, just as a reminder, those of you who are listening, we would love to make your acquaintance. And if you'll reach out to us at media@cibolocreek.com, just introduce yourself. We'd love to know your name and find out a little bit of how you experience this podcast. And if you have any suggestions or recommendations for topics for Wyatt and I to tackle, we'd love to hear your suggestions, and we would do our very best to honor that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you're listening on a podcast platform, you can also give us a review, which helps us out too. But don't think I'm going to become one of those people that ask for reviews and ratings all the time. But anyways, yes, let us know, and we'll hopefully get your topics in if you have some suggestions. We hope you enjoyed this presentation of Cibolo Creek Community Church. If you did, please consider supporting the ministry of our church. Your donations make a difference. To check out more resources or to share a gift, please visit us at cibolocreek.com. Thanks for listening.